Welcome to Logic Breaks. This is our first episode ever, recording in early in January of 2024. The idea of Logic Breaks, of course, it's a bit of a double entendre, where there are breaks in logic, places where logic doesn't quite work. It might sound logical, but it doesn't. Logical fallacies, propaganda techniques, other flaws of logic that we'll talk about a little bit later. So that's the basic idea. And of course, the joke of, these are breaks from the world, small little segments. We're not going to do anything probably too long. The first one I'd like to talk about today, the first logical fallacy I'd like to talk about. Actually, let me back up a second. What we'd like to do, I think, with this channel, and let us know what you think about this, is do both of these things. Both go ahead and talk about the different kinds of fallacies, do some definitions, do some examples, help people understand what they are a little bit more. Again, either or, non sequitur, hasty generalization, all those kinds of things, false analogy, no true Scotsman. You get the idea. Okay, we'll try to talk about those, explain what they are, give examples, maybe even give some different differentiation between or among the different kinds of fallacies and propaganda techniques. But then also, I think what we'd like to do in the future is, again, look more at the news, social media, what's going on in the political world, especially now that we here in the US are in an election year in 2024. I'm sure there'll be lots of examples of logical fallacies and propaganda techniques. Let us know what you think. What would you like to see covered? What things are confusing to you about fallacies, propaganda techniques, etc., or just what would you like to see covered in a channel like this? Or do you have other ideas that would make sense for the focus of this channel? Without further ado, let's talk about the first one of the most common logical fallacies out there is the either or fallacy. And that has a number of different names. Like it as it sounds, you're given the idea that there are only two possibilities. You can only do one thing or another, when in fact there might be 3 or 5 or 20 or 100 different options available to you. Now, the either or fallacy gets a number of different names. So if you hear these different names, people are probably talking about the same thing. Either or fallacy, false dilemma, false dichotomy, fallacy of insufficient options, black and white fallacy is also a name lots of people use for that, as opposed to, shades of gray, nuance, complexity versus only one or another option. And oftentimes only one or another option, as in one is the good or right, just, noble option, one's the bad, evil option. And there are things like that in the world. There are times when one option is clearly the bad or evil or immoral, unethical option, but a lot of things are more complicated than that. I'm going to argue we have, in our social media and other places, in our politics, we've gone to a very either or kind of place. But let's talk a little bit more about what this means, what the either or option means. Let me give you one or two examples of things that I think are pretty good examples of the either or fallacy that we're dealing with today. Some people might say you're with us or you're against us. Well, there are times when you do have to make difficult choices, where you have to make a choice between one option or another, one person or another, one philosophy, one group of people or another. There are times when you absolutely have to make those choices and when that is the right thing to do. But of course, sometimes people are trying to force you into this when there are other possibilities. Maybe I'm with you for the goal that you will have, but I'm not with you for the methods. So for example, let's say you are in a work environment and the goal is to sell more widgets, just meaning, sort of a placeholder for whatever it is you're selling to the company. You're trying to sell more tires, you're trying to sell more coffee, you're trying to sell more, insurance policies, whatever it may happen to be. All right, well, that's the goal of the company. That's the main goal of the company. Maybe that's great. You're on board with that. That's what you're there to do. It's part of your job to sell more of whatever that thing is, that good or service. But your coworker is willing to lie, skirt, maybe even break some laws in order to do that. Well, again, that might be a place where you say, I'm with you in the goal, I'm not with you on the method. So if you hear people talk about the ends justifying the means, or even using the term Machiavellian, this is what they're talking about. You're willing to do whatever it takes, even if the methods are unethical or immoral in one way or another. That's essentially what they're saying. So again, you might be with the person as far as the end goals, but you're not with them as far as the methods to get there. So you could be with them in one way, but against them in another way. So again, that's an example of people trying to give you an either or. An example I can think of as well, you can either learn to code or you'll never have a good job. Well, are there lots of good jobs that might require coding skills? Sure. Some of them are very good jobs by most people's estimation. The number of hours worked, the amount of money made, um, the freedom that you might have at some of those jobs. Not all of them, obviously. Um, so that might be a good job for lots of people, and it might be one kind of good job. Is it the only kind of good job out there? So people are giving you insufficient options. Maybe learning to code is one good way, especially as we move towards more AI. Maybe learning how to use AI in a way that other people don't understand or don't know how to use might give you an advantage in getting a job, in a promotion, or even just keeping the current job that you have. So those could be valuable things. Are they the only options? Are there lots of jobs that most people would consider pretty good jobs that don't require those skills? Do most CEOs know how to code? Some do. I'm guessing most do not know how to code. Most people consider the CEO position a pretty good job. A lot of money. Okay. Yes, a lot of responsibility, perhaps, but a lot of money. Do most medical doctors know how to code? My guess is that most do not. Some certainly do, as in many areas of life, but most probably do not. So there's an example of an either or fallacy. To get just a little bit more political, one of my examples that I like to use these days is oppressor oppressed. That's become a very popular, in my mind, either or false dilemma. Um, this is not to say that there aren't individuals or groups that have oppressed others or have been oppressed historically and in the contemporary time for that matter. I'm not going to get into which ones are which. You will have to make up your mind about that, in current situations in politics and the global situations that we're looking at here in early 2024 and beyond. But you'll have to make up your mind about that. But is that perhaps oversimplifying some things? Is that the only way to see the world? Does it, if that is your frame, if that's the lens through which you look at the world for every individual, every group, do you start to dehumanize people? Do you start to treat them as one thing or another when maybe they're an oppressor in one situation, oppressed in a different situation, or maybe that's just a bad way to look at the situation for that individual or that group of people or that situation that you're encountering. So I'm going to argue that that oppressor-oppressed dynamic is a kind of false dilemma. Again, not to say there aren't situations in which one individual or group is an oppressed group and another is an oppressor, but the idea that that's the only way or the best way to look at every single situation, I think that's one of many lenses. It should not be the only lens. And if you go about your life, I think that way, looking at everything through that lens, again, I think it dehumanizes individuals and whole groups potentially. I think it's probably not good for human flourishing. And I'm going to argue that maybe it's not even good for individual mental health to have that as your main or only lens for looking at the world. One lens, possibly, not the only one for sure. So that's kind of my argument about that oppressor oppressed as an either or idea. Let's talk about a couple things that maybe don't qualify as either or false dilemma or fallacy of insufficient options. What the either, so hopefully you have an idea what either or is. Let's talk about some things that it probably is not, that probably don't qualify as either or, even though they might sound like they are either or fallacies. So the word ultimatum, you're given a choice, and usually you're given a choice between two unpleasant things, two unpleasant outcomes, two unpleasant decisions. These are bad things, and but you're going to have to make a choice at some point, and maybe you're going to have to make a choice quickly, depending on the situation. So either or is not about ultimatums. It's not about shows of force. It's not about saying you have these two options, or I'm going to do this bad thing to you. It's not you have these two options, or I'm going to blackmail you, or I'm going to call you a bad name, I'm going to get you fired, or take away your money, or whatever it might be. That's an ultimatum. That's not an either or in the strictest sense of the logical options. You might be forced into only having two options if the other person has more power over you, if they're your boss, if they financially have power over you, again, if they have the ability to blackmail you because they know some things about you that you don't want other people to know. But those aren't the kinds of things we mean. I'll give you a couple examples. You probably can fill in some examples in your own mind already, but let me give you a couple. Give me your wallet, or, and if somebody has a weapon, is pointing it at you, and you think they are potentially willing to use it, you might decide to give them your wallet. You might not, but you have two bad choices to make. You don't want to give up your wallet, but you also don't want to get hurt or have other people around you get hurt. So you have to make a difficult decision in that moment. And again, it might depend on how well you are able to defend yourself, whether you also perhaps have the ability to defend yourself. I won't go into how you might do that. You can probably imagine the ways you might be able to do that. But again, this might depend on your own situation, your own comfort level, your physical ability to defend yourself and others, how threatening this person does seem to be. Will they really go through with the threat if you don't give them the wallet? Not a fun situation to be in, but that's an ultimatum more than a either or fallacy, because there's a power situation, there's a power differential or a threat of violence or force involved in that. Or, you know, a less dramatic example might be you're a young kid, and one of your parents says you have to eat your broccoli or you can't have dessert. Well, okay, is it logically possible for you to not have broccoli and still have dessert? Of course, it's logically possible. Okay, so we're talking about logical possibility versus force or power differential or those kinds of things. So if usually the parent does have a little bit more power than the young kid. Power struggles happen, of course, when the kids get to be, you know, preteens and teenagers. And it's not to say that, you know, you should always, as a parent, use force as your way of getting things that you want, obviously. But you do have a little bit more power, perhaps, in that situation than a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old, etc. So again, that's a power differential issue, as opposed to truly an either or fallacy. So again, ultimatums versus either or fallacies. So we're going to go ahead and close the either or fallacy for right now. Let us know if you have questions about how this works, either or fallacy versus ultimatum versus false dilemmas. There are real dilemmas in life, again, versus ones that where you actually do have more than two options. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you have questions. Give some of your own examples of either or fallacies down in the comments. And again, let us know what else you'd like to see covered in the future. See you on the next one.